Good morning, everybody. Oh, very loud. Yeah, I wanted to introduce Brittany Wilson. She's got a BSN RN, and she is the nurse behind Nerdy Nurse and the co-founder of Health Media Academy. She's also an award-winning author and blogger, an international keynote speaker, and an influencer in nursing and healthcare technology communities. So let's welcome Brittany.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Can you guys hear me okay? I want to apologize prematurely. These shoes, not the ones I had picked for this outfit. I have pregnancy brain and am navigationally impaired, so that combination gave you this lovely ensemble, which I could write off maybe as boho chic, but I'm just going to level with you. It wasn't intentional. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. I love really talking about this topic because social media is so powerful, can do such great things for basically anyone in the healthcare space, and patients are relying on it for a lot of different things. So let's talk about what's on the agenda today. Why use social media? Search engine results, what those are, why they matter, and how social media impacts that. The rules of social media, the consequences of using it well and inappropriately, as well as personal branding, and then just some case studies about Google people who didn't use social media quite so appropriately. So let's talk about why social media. Well, as you can see, about 43% of customers state that they found that social media impacts the way that they handle their healthcare. They are looking online to see what they're going to do with their healthcare, right? So we need to make sure that the things that get up on Twitter, Facebook, and so on at least have some sprinkles of validity. And it's not Susie Sally's mama's son talking about how her toe didn't heal well after she went to the last ER, right? We want to have some good, well-researched information that's going out there to at least help populate it a little bit better. 90% of individuals 18 to 24 say they trust medical info shared on their social feeds. 90%. And you've got people posting things like a magic root is the secret to weight loss and the fountain of youth, right? So that's not a good combination. 41% of consumers report that social media impacted which physician or hospital they chose to get care from, which is pretty impactful because they're using it like Yelp. You can actually rate your doctor. Did you know that? There's like tons of Health Grads, Vitals, all those places where you can rate your doctor. And nearly 60% of doctors admit that social media improves the quality of care of their patients. So one of the nice things about it is patients actually become more informed. They come in and ask a lot more questions so they get better results from their care. And then 22% of patients use Facebook, 20% use YouTube to search for healthcare related topics. So this is a lot of people using it for a lot of things that's not going to go away. So first I want to talk about Google. Do you guys use Google? Is that a thing? Okay. It's really important. Most people don't even consider social media when you're thinking about Google, but it's important because 80% of your potential employers are going to Google you. Sometimes your current employers will Google you if you're new and you've done something really weird and they're like, who the heck have I hired? You can actually impact those search results. So the things that appear on the first page of Google are what most people are going to look at because, I don't know if you guys know this, but the best place to hide a dead body is on the second page of Google. So the first page is really what you're looking for, and you want to make sure that the results that come up when they Google your name are good ones, right? They're positive about you. They're not the keg stand that you did in college or any other mildly inappropriate pictures that you wouldn't want your boss to see. So your social media profiles generally appear on the first page. It's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, so you can make those be really well. And so when people Google you, all they're going to see is like your wedding board or your nice pictures that you put on the internet because you're not going to put bad pictures on the internet, right? So to get that to work correctly and to make sure those social results that are going to appear on that first page, you need to make sure that you're using social media appropriately. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is appropriate. Can social media raise your salary? It can, a lot, like 5 times. So we're also going to talk about, can social media get you fired? Do you think it can get you fired? It's unfortunately pretty easy to do it too. And what's really interesting about the healthcare environment is we're a lot more sensitive to social media than some of the other environments. So you can probably get by if you worked at a fast food restaurant with a lot more stuff on social media, and in healthcare it's almost, you're like almost an extension of your employer a lot of times, especially if you work in a licensed profession, like if you're a nurse or something else like that. So just keep that in mind. You're also generally representing your profession if you identify yourself online. So not only your employer, but you as your healthcare simulation professional are sort of representing your entire industry if you've identified that. So the rules of social media are pretty simple. And the first one is really just to talk about yourself, your profession, your family, your hobbies, and your interests. If your hobbies are arguing about politics, more power to you, but just know in a country where we're divided pretty down the middle, you're going to risk alienating half of the people that may have benefited from half of the information you're going to share. Now, it certainly depends on the settings of your accounts. For example, if Facebook is locked down and only your friends and family have access and they know that you love or you hate a certain politician, I guess have at it, but just know that you can never be 100% sure what someone's going to do with information they find. And so unless you know that every person on your friends list is like 100% your BFF and would never do anything to injure you, just know that anything you post, even on lockdown accounts, can be screenshot, shared forever, put on the 6 o'clock news, sent to your boss. Seen that? Anything like that. So the second thing is never talk about patients or identifiable coworkers. So I've done this. Patients, I always make things a little bit vague, but very early in my career, the reason I started in social media is because I was bullied by other nurses that I worked with. And I needed to talk about it, and they weren't going to talk to me because they didn't like me. So I went online and I started talking about it, and frankly, I probably was a little bit too prescriptive, because if they had looked at it, they would have known it was them, and it was just really inappropriate behavior. I fortunately know that now, that nobody at that hospital really knew what the internet was at the time, so I got by with it. But I'm telling you that I've learned a lesson personally that it can really cause you a lot of damage, and when I had an opportunity to sit back and reflect on that behavior, realized it was really inappropriate, even though I was hurting and I just wanted to share that experience. So keep that in mind, that sometimes posting things when you're in a heated emotional state is not the best opportunity to share information, because you might post something that would get you in trouble or hurt somebody else's feelings or damage your career. You want to avoid identifying your employer on your social media profiles unless you're in a position that it merits it. So what I mean by that is if you're a staff person at a hospital, typically that's not a position that merits you identifying your employer. If you're a leader in that organization, depends on the level you're at as to whether or not you need to identify your employer. The second you identify your employer on any social media profile, you become an ambassador for that organization. It just happens. People look at you, they see your name, they see something you say, and they say, I'm never going to that place. I cannot believe that person hired them. I'm going to, call. I'm going to just be irritated. I'm just never going to use those services. The other thing is doxing. Do you guys know what doxing is? Okay, so let me tell you about the world that is the internet these days. Typically in political areas, but it can happen for just about anything. If you post something that somebody finds is inappropriate, they try to claim it's some egregious error. Maybe you think you've made a racist statement and you didn't think it was a racist statement. They will find who you worked for and call them, and with groups of people band together to try to get you fired. So listing your employer online just makes it a lot easier for them to do that. And I'm not saying that to scare you. I just want you to know, the internet kind of can work that way. Even if you've made something like a careless error, it wasn't intentional, it can just happen. So food for thought on listing your employer. Now, that being said, I list my current employer, but I haven't listed any of my other ones when I worked for a hospital. The company I work for now is a little different, but when I worked for a hospital, I felt it was really inappropriate for me as a staff nurse to kind of be speaking and looking in any way on their behalf. So you also don't want to post anything on social media that you wouldn't say in front of your boss or your human resources officer. So like if you wouldn't print it out and walk in the office and say, here, made this for you, you shouldn't put it online. Because as I mentioned earlier, anyone can screenshot that information and do that. I knew of a nurse that was driving to work and sent a Snapchat to what she thought was her group of friends, but ended up being a larger group of people. And she says, this is really embarrassing what she says, although I'm going to preface by saying she said it was a joke. Guess who's still drunk and driving to work? Now, are you going to, so if she says it's a joke, which people make those kind of jokes, what are you going to believe, that or the screenshot? So what do you think happened as a result of that? She got fired. She could have lost her license as well. I don't believe she did, but that's just an example of, you know, what you put online, you got to make sure is ready for showtime. So you also want to uplift your profession, right? So if you are identifying yourself in any way as a simulation professional, you want to make sure that when you're talking about your industry, you're doing it in a positive light. Why? Because there's just enough negativity out there, and disparaging your profession does nothing to improve the things that you think are poor about it. It is one thing to highlight things that you think are issues and then offer positive, enriching ideas to improve it. It's just quite another to make it a rant session. So nobody likes that. People don't enjoy following people that do that, so just keep that in mind. But I just want to tell you, I haven't talked about the big 4-letter, I guess it's 5-letter word in the room, HIPAA. Are you guys, when you think about social media as HIPAA, one of the things that comes to your mind when you're thinking about talking about industry-related events? It's one of those things that scares people to death because HIPAA seems like this big, really intimidating thing. But I'll tell you, I've been doing this for over 10 years, and it's really not that bad. Here are the 3 things you need to know about HIPAA. There are 18 identifiers that you should avoid. And we're not gonna talk about them today because there's 18 of them, and we could do like hours on that session alone. Oops. If you want to download them, you can go to the website, thenerdynurse.com/HIPAA. There's a PDF you can download, so you can print it out, put it on your wall, have a good time. What I will tell you about those identifiers is you need to know them. Most of them are pretty understandable. They're things like security number, birth dates, dates of stay. One that I think is really interesting is that you are not able to share a patient's age if they're over 90 years old. So patient's age in general is fine, but over 90 years old, and if you think about it, it makes sense. That's a tiny population of people, right? So it's much easier to identify who those people are. All right, so we're doing questions at the end, but since there might be some questions about HIPAA, so write those down so we can talk about those later. Here are some key social media situations. Don't put your home at risk. What do I mean by that? If you go on vacation, don't post you're on vacation. Why? Because you have let everyone know your house is available to be robbed. And there are some insurances that if they can find documented evidence of that, will not pay your claim if you are robbed. Food for thought. Take your pictures, post them when you get home. It's super hard because you want everyone to be jealous that you're at Disney World. I get it. This is one of those things where if your profile is super locked down, you may have a little bit more liberty with, but even then, you just got to be really careful of who you're friends with. Because your cousin Bobby is a sweet kid, but he's friends with people who aren't. And if somehow they see that and your house gets robbed, just saying, it's just one of those things to avoid. So nothing online is ever truly anonymous. I know a lot of people who have anonymous accounts and they think that they are just saved. First of all that information could be subpoenaed. Second of all, usually people leave enough indication in the things that they talk about that they can clearly point back to where they are. So just know that even if you think you're just doing your due diligence, you really can't. You probably had to register with an email address for that account, and that links that back to you. Just always keep that in mind. You need to know your employer's social media policy. How many people have read their employer's social media policy? Okay, 30%, it looks like. How many of your people know if your employer has a social media policy? So they do have one? So the thing about a social media policy that's really interesting is that now most employers have one, but 5 years ago or so they didn't. So people would make mistakes online and then point back to the fact, well, it's not in the social media policy, or we don't have a social media policy. So then employers would get really funny, and I know some of you guys in here have employees. So if you don't have a social media policy, make sure you have one. Make sure your employees are well used to it. I also suggest you make an inclusive social media policy and not an exclusive social media policy. Don't use social media, or here's not what to do on social media. It's really poor social media policy. Talking about how it is appropriate to use social media. And if you're going to reference your employer or your industry, here's how we would like you to do it, is the right way to create a good social media policy. You also want to consider who should you really friend. We talked a little bit about who's on your friends list, what can they share it with. One thing I see more often than not is people who are in direct patient care friending patients. Probably not so much an issue in your guys' industry, but what is interesting to think about is should you friend your coworkers? As a rule, I don't usually friend any of my coworkers that I work with in a physical office. And the reason being is sometimes I get a little political. And I don't want anyone to judge me for things that I say outside of the office environment that I wouldn't say inside the office environment. So you just want to be really thoughtful. And again, when you friend your coworkers, you make it a whole lot easier for someone who you may or may not know their true intentions to screenshot something and send to your boss. So just keep that in mind. That's a touchy one. I know you like the people that you work with. And I'm not saying never do this, but you just really want to consider it. So what can you post? Excuse me. That, you can post that. It gets better every time, right? So you can post appropriate pictures of yourself, your friends, your family, thought-provoking articles, cute gifs of panda bears, funny pictures of cute animals, and witty commentary. You can post any of the stuff that's clean, if you will. Anything non-controversial is what I generally recommend. If you're going to post something controversial, I think that information should be shared, but I do recommend that you try to take a non-biased approach to it. So anything that's controversial in any political, healthcare, any domain, it's nice to share that information, but it's better to take the approach of, this seems really interesting, what do you guys think, to start a natural dialogue. What most people end up doing is saying, this is despicable and disgusting, I can't believe X, Y, Z, which starts a very biased conversation, which again may alienate half of the people on your friends list and just sets a really bad tone. What's better for society and will make a much happier experience for your page is if you share the information but do so in an unbiased manner so that both people can feel equally allowed to engage and participate with you. Make sense? So you also want to post anything newscast ready, right? So if they print it out and put it on you, or if you got a mugshot on the 6 o'clock news and this was the tweet that they put under you, would you be proud of that? Something to consider. So with good social media, a lot of great things can happen. You can have improved job satisfaction because you can connect with a larger group of peers in your industry and make you feel really excited and passionate about work. You can connect with a larger community. You can get support and advice for issues and challenges around work or around life. I'm looking at a lot of baby forums at the moment. So all of those things are really helpful, and they're not the type of thing that you could get offline, at least in the same sort of level of information. You can also get more employment opportunities. What's really interesting is if you use social media to sort of share your thought leadership around a particular topic, people identify that and they will pluck you from the vast internet and say, hey, I really like what you're talking about. I assume you can probably do this stuff that you're talking about. Why don't you come work for me? It's pretty cool. It's happened to a lot of nurses I know. I've had it happen to me a couple times. It's really interesting what you do when you put into the world this brand or this image that you want to convey about the topics that you're interested in. It can really make an impact. Now that being said, it sort of does impact how you use social media. So you have to make a decision. Am I using social media for professional uses, or am I using it for personal uses? Or am I using this account for professional uses, or am I using it for personal uses? Because a lot of times those two things don't mix. So have you guys heard of the term personal branding? So you've heard of Nike and Google and Apple, right? Those icons mean something to you. What do you think of when you think of Apple? You think of electronics. But more so than that, you think of sleek, beautiful, thin, really expensive, need a new one every year, but will knock down the door and wait in line to get it, electronics. They've conveyed this personal brand of desire, or this professional brand in their case of desire that makes you really interested in their stuff and what they're doing. So you pay attention when they announce things, when they release things, when they have new products out. You can do that as an individual as well. You can impact your career opportunities. You can change the image of how you are perceived, how your profession is perceived. And your personal brand is also a reflection of you online and off. So I didn't do a good job of that today because I wore my hippie shoes. But typically speaking, you want to sort of dress for the job you want, if you will. Unless you're in a hospital setting, you're supposed to wear scrubs. You probably shouldn't wear a suit because that's gross. But in general, you want to just make sure that your appearance reflects the type of brand that you're trying to convey. And also the things that you write online reflect the type of brand or the type of image you're trying to convey out into the world. So with personal branding, just know that you own it. You can shape it. Again, those social media results that appear on that first page of Google when somebody Googles your name are going to impact what they think of you and what image they have of you as a person. Your personal brand, if you will. They may not know that they're looking at your personal brand, that that's what they're looking at. Your online presence impacts it, your personal appearance, your attitude, all of those things. So if you really have a nasty attitude, that's not good for your personal brand. And what I often say to people is, be yourself online unless you're a jerk, and if you're a jerk, be somebody else. What I can tell you is that social media, especially things like Twitter, can give you an opportunity to have a filter that you don't have in real life. I sometimes am personally a loose cannon. I don't know if any of you guys are that. Like, things fall out of my mouth before my brain has had a chance to process them. I'm getting better with old age, but it's still pretty bad. On Twitter, I have the advantage of having this built-in filter where I can read through something before I put it out in the world. That's a beautiful thing. I don't think we take advantage of it often enough. We have the same thing in email, but again, I don't think we take advantage of it. If you see this as an opportunity to really be very thoughtful with your words, then you can see it as something that's not just a burden to spell check, but something that allows you to put out the right image that you want. Right, what is inappropriate? Oversharing. Oversharing is kind of a generic term. I'll give you one example I see people do, pictures of their children's poop. I get it when you got a child that's potty training and they poop in the potty or on the floor or just anywhere other than their diaper. It's exciting. It's one of those things you're like, ooh, I don't know if that held up well. It's not. It's good because it's probably one of those things you're not going to get fired for, but it's one of those things like, oh, that was TMI. Really intimate relationship information, the fight you just had with your mother, your brother, your sister, I don't know that that's helpful to anyone, and the only thing it really does is serve to widen the divide that you've created already. So just be careful, don't overshare. You also want to make sure you're not putting any patient information or identifiable coworker information, as we've already talked about, identifying your employer in your profiles, anything you'd be embarrassed to say to your mother, your preacher, your boss, or potential employer, anything that could degrade or embarrass your profession. Essentially, this is like the rules of social media again. So just repeating so we make sure we got those. So what should you avoid? You should avoid using your employer's computers to access your social media accounts. Do any of you guys use Facebook at work on your employer's computer? Some of you do. I know some of you. Do you know they can keep logs of all that? Their systems can track everything that you do. So number one, it's just an inappropriate use of your employer's time while you're at work. It's just not a nice thing for you to do. But also, it's just like real nosy stuff that they can look at. And I don't know about you guys, but like I don't want my employer seeing the inner workings of my stuff. Also, most people save their passwords to their browsers. So if you leave your employer, guess who's got your password to Facebook? They do. So food for thought. I also don't recommend that you update social media about work while you're at work. This is really pertinent in clinical professions where I see nurses at a nurse's station taking selfies. I'm like, I can see patients' names in the background. I don't know that we thought this through. Or when people will talk about a difficult clinical situation that they're currently experiencing and they're at work, I'm like, if that patient dies, you don't think that they're going to use this tweet to reference that you weren't performing your care to the best of your ability? Food for thought. Also, it just is another piece of arsenal if you're, especially when people tweet at work, a lot of times it's negative. It's not often that people are tweeting, having the best day at work, work selfie. They're tweeting, oh, I'm just a stressful day at work. My coworkers being such a pain, X, Y, and Z. So if you think about the fact that probably 90% of the tweets that you would make at work would be negative, it's just good to avoid. Now, that being said, there are exceptions where it's great to post when you're at work. If you're at a company who you do identify on your social media profiles, you're doing an event like this would be super appropriate to post that on while you were at work. Any other scenario you just want to be really thoughtful of. Again, complaining about being bored, tired, impaired, frustrated, or anything else, it could be a liability while you're on the clock. So if you were talking about, if you're driving to work and saying, hey, you're still drunk, liability. If you're at work and you're saying, oh, I'm so tired, I don't know how I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then you break some $5,000 equipment, I mean, I don't know about you, but I would probably hold you accountable for that. Like, you said you're tired. Why are you at work if you're going to break stuff? So, you also want to consider effects on the profession. So, we all know Grumpy Cat, or at least we should. It's not as popular these days, but he was on like a world tour for a while. So, generally, you want to make generalizations based upon one simulation professional's actions. You want to avoid that. Because if somebody you work with does X, Y, Z, and they're not necessarily in your industry, but they're close to you, say, oh, all people in the lab are just a pain to deal with. I can't stand it. You've made a generalization about an entire profession that does nothing to impact either of your professions positively. So just avoid it. You want to make sure that the things that you post give a positive effect to the public's perception of your profession. You're, in a sense, an ambassador for your profession, so you want to make sure that the things you say have value and impact the world, because your friends aren't in the simulation profession, right? Or maybe all your friends are. But most people have people in their lives that aren't. So what happens if you don't use social media incorrectly? Now, full disclosure, I've done this talk for several years, and this has been in there since well before he was president. And so regardless of your political affiliations, this is not a political statement. This is the most famous person who said you're fired. So that's how that came about. So what can happen if you use social media inappropriately? You can have bad press for your employer. I know that sounds silly, but like again, for the doxing scenario I talked about, what happens when, so several years ago there was a man who drove up to Chick-fil-A because he was mad about something Chick-fil-A did and threw water in the window. His employer was all over the news. Do you think they like that? Was that the image they went for? He didn't do anything. It was not about work at all. He threw water at somebody at Chick-fil-A. But his employer received the bad press as well as him. It can also lead to a loss of employment, as is the very clever you're fired gift going on there. And just know that your words matter. And you could also, if you have a license, lose it. This is a pretty big deal because that's your livelihood. And it could make you essentially unemployable, depending on how bad. I'm sure that Chick-fil-A guy is having a really hard time getting work. So here's a couple case studies. So here's a picture. Can you guys see it okay? This is a picture on Instagram. It's of an ER room after they had somebody come in from a trauma. Can anybody guess what the problem with this photograph with posting it on social media is? So you think it's HIPAA? It's not. Technically, I think it should be. It's close enough where you could identify that. That was published in the newspaper that day, so people could tie it together. But this actually was Nurse Katie Duke. She was on a popular reality TV show called New York Med, and she posted this online. It was actually a re-share of a post a physician made. Physician got nothing, no consequences. These public ones. Maybe he got talking to, did not get fired. She got fired, but it wasn't because of HIPAA in this particular case, or at least they didn't claim that. They said it was strictly because it was insensitive. And it kind of is. Patient versus train. What? And I will say in the healthcare profession, in some environments, you tend to have a little bit darker humor. This is the sort of things that should probably stay in our circles and not go on the internet, because people are going to judge us poorly, even though that we use that to cope. In certain situations, it doesn't look well because it makes us look insensitive. So this was, if you want to look up the article, nurse firing highlights hazards of social media in hospital. I think this happened in 2012 or 2013. So here's another one. Can we see what's wrong with this picture? It's a little bit grainy, so I'll tell you what's going on. It's a nursing student. She's got her badge on, and she's got her employer, her nursing school's tag. She's in front of a placenta, and she's holding up, I don't know what that is on the placenta. The umbilical cord, I guess? I should probably know that. I have not been in the clinical setting for a little while. I'm just going to tell you that. She's holding that. Does anyone want to guess what's wrong with that one? Well, it's actually really interesting because it wasn't necessarily HIPAA, because it'd be real hard to identify whose placenta that was. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I could see a lineup and be like, that's mine. I know it. That's my placenta. It was, and the scenario that happened to bring this about was really interesting. So the young lady's picture is Doyle Burns. She was a nursing student. Don't remember what nursing school, not relevant. This was several years ago, and she was so excited. You can see how excited she is about going to clinical and looking at this placenta and holding it. I'm not sure why that was so exciting, but it was super exciting to her. And for a lot of nursing students in your first clinical, you get pumped. It's like an adrenaline rush. She took this photograph, and she asked her teacher, her and a couple of other students, can we post these on Facebook? Teacher's response, you girls. So the student thought, oh, well, that's a yes. I'm going to go ahead and do it. So she posted it. It was up for a couple of days, and she gets a call from the dean of the school. The dean of the school says, take it down. We need to talk about it. Ultimately, the end of the story ended up being she got expelled from school. Wow. And the reason being was basically that she just made poor judgment. It wasn't a HIPAA thing. It's just poor judgment. And what was really interesting about the whole scenario was she asked her teacher, and her teacher had an opportunity to really educate her. This is what they do. She didn't. But what it boiled down to is the school didn't have a social media policy. So while she did get expelled from the school initially, they did have to bring her back in and paid her, I think $100,000, if I'm not mistaken, for sort of the inconvenience and loss of wages and all those sort of things. So in the end, Doyle won. Was it appropriate for her to post that? Probably not. Was it appropriate for her instructor to laugh at her and say, oh, girls, or not have a social media policy? No. So really, in this case, I kind of want to side with Doyle because she did what she thought was right, and she was young and uninformed and really didn't know any better. If you want to look up more information, you can look up nursing school kicked out for placenta. Here's my favorite one. This young lady is I don't know. Do you think this one's wrong? No, I don't know this person, and I'm not cared to look up anything afterwards in terms of their license because it just disgusts me to all end. What I think is really interesting about this person grew up, graduated college, graduated nursing school, passed the state boards, which is pretty hard, went through a job interview, like passed as a normal human being, and then does this. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Obviously, she got fired for that. But it's really interesting to think that any human being would at a moment say, I hope somebody is on the point of death so I can have something to do. Like, it's really something that would interest me. So it's certainly poor judgment. In this case, it's not HIPAA. Again, well, my favorite thing about this one, she's tagged her employer. Yeah. Hello, please fire me. I'm not going to even make it hard for you. I'm not going to even make one of my friends who has good judgment and knows I shouldn't be doing this, print this out and send it to somebody. I'm just going to let you know so you can come right now during this shift. So again, if you want more information, you can go to the article and get more information on that. Fun times. People do that sort of thing. So we're wrapping things up. We're going to come to the end and put a bow on it. I do want to apologize. I looked for simulation professional examples of poor social media use. You guys are doing a good job. You're not doing a lot of newsworthy stuff out there that's negative. So hurrah. You're doing a lot of positive stuff because you're putting a lot of positive thing on the internet. I did find a lot of people who were sharing really cool articles, but that wasn't as entertaining as the ones we put in here today. So putting it all together, follow all those rules, post things that are appropriate, talk about yourself, make sure it's newscast ready. Do you want to print it on your tombstone? Is it going to get you fired? All of those things. Uplift your profession. Use social media appropriately. Be aware of your personal branding. And avoid scenarios that will allow you to violate HIPAA. Basically, just if you talk about a patient, scramble the details. Don't say, I took care of them today. They were in room 302. Or, or even a student. Like, you just scramble the details. You just don't want to do that. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys having me today. It's been a lot of fun. And now we can open the floor to any questions that you may have. Yes.